Let's talk to our pal, Frank Gaffney. Now, Frank is the president of the Center for Security Policy. Now, Frank, when my dictaphone translator device I have here on my iPhone, where I'm trying to dictate notes to people or emails, thinks my dog, whose name is Daphne, thinks her name is Gaffney. I think because I have so many emails from you over the years. Apple thinks that my dog is named after you, so I've taken to calling her Gaffney sometimes, just taking out the middleman.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's right. So she's co-hosting with me today. She's right here.
A dog, that's for sure.
Well, she's a beautiful German Shepherd, so I think you would see she's a puppy, 11 months, perfectly built, from Virginia, mind you, and you would consider it quite the tribute. So, Frank, let's talk about it first of all. Do you live in Virginia?
I do.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So give us your thoughts overall on, as a Virginian, what your takeaways are from last night.
Well, as you know, I don't do politics, but my observation of the nexus between this election and the stuff that I work on is I'm afraid official Washington is going to perceive the outcome in Virginia as a mandate for more swamp, no wall, and more confusion or willful blindness, unfortunately, about the enemy that I think we've got to be confronting, namely Sharia supremacism. This is only part of, the backstory, of course, of this election, and we'll hear a lot more of it. But I mention it, Alex, because in part this is likely to be a feature of a hearing that will take place today for Kirstjen Nielsen, the designated next Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And I'm afraid she kind of aligns with more swamp, no wall, and more willful blindness about the jihad. So it's a very practical, near-term opportunity to see how this is going to play out. But that's my concern, I must tell you.
Yeah, and she's a real problem, and she's flying under the radar because she's only come to light in this incredibly intense news cycle that we have going right now, per usual, perhaps even a little more intense than usual. Give us a crash course in Kirstjen Nielsen.
Well, she's a woman who has sort of been part of the Bush national security apparatus at best. At worst, she's actually been involved with sort of the World Economic Forum, Soros establishment, Swamp International, if you will. She has come to prominence because John Kelly picked her up, having, I guess, admired her work primarily on counter cyber threats at the National Security Council under George W. Bush, and I think she's got some contributions to make in that area. Unfortunately, as we've learned, she's kind of been a dog in the manger over the past year. Being thought as the person to take that job on at DHS, the cyber piece of the portfolio. She didn't take the job. She wouldn't essentially let anybody else take the job because she might take the job. Now she's been nominated at John Kelly's direction, let's be clear, to become the next DHS secretary. I don't think she's qualified for it. And as I say, I think on a number of key points, key Trump platform points, she seems not to be in alignment with the president, and I think that is going to be a serious problem should she be confirmed, which seems likely at the moment.
Okay, so let's go around the world. We're very limited time in the segment. Unfortunately, Frank, we could always hang out for longer. I want to get your thoughts on what's happening in Saudi Arabia. Is this a genuine reformer movement, or is this just a traditional consolidation of power? And should we be settling for a more moderate version of Islam coming out of Saudi Arabia, or is it all pretty much part and parcel the same thing?
Great questions, and I don't think we know the answers right now. I know our mutual friend Steve Bannon has high hopes for this fellow Mohammad bin Salman, the crown prince today, the king tomorrow, perhaps. He is certainly consolidating power, and he's doing it with a certain ruthlessness. It's you get different views on whether he's reforming the sort of Wahhabi strain of the country's ruling elite, or whether he's going to be prepared to do business with them as successive members of this dynasty have to date. I think the bigger piece of this, which we got to keep our eye on, Alex, is this initial public offering that MBS, as he's known, is hoping is going to float the boat of the Saudi monarchy. It has a lot of implications, one of which I think is getting no attention at all at the moment, unfortunately, and that is the possibility that the Chinese are the principal purchasers of whatever they sell of Saudi Aramco, and use it to replace the dollar with the renminbi, the Chinese currency, as the means of monetizing the sale of Saudi oil products. That could essentially wind up replacing the dollar as the reserve currency of the world, with very profound implications, economic and strategic.
Yeah, we're going to have to flesh this out in a future interview, Frank, because it's such an important topic. Let's turn to Trump's Asia trip. He's been in Japan, South Korea. First of all, it looks like last night he was going to go to the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. I want to get your thoughts on it. Would that have been a productive trip? He couldn't make it apparently due to weather. It was going to be a surprise visit. Or would that have been some sort of a publicity stunt or something that could have been productive?
Well, I think, to the extent you can see firsthand from that vantage point the horror of North Korea, it may have had an impact on him as president. He seems pretty clear-eyed about how bad the place is, so I don't know that it was decisive. I think it would have probably been a bit of a boost in the morale of the troops, and he's clearly focused on trying to do that. We've got a serious problem there. Men and women are, putting their lives on the line to try to prevent North Korea from acting aggressively in the future as it has in the past, and I think it probably would have been good for them as well as for the president.
Okay, and then I wanted to ask you again about the president heading to China. What do you anticipate for that trip?
He is going to be trying to do two things, as best I can tell. He's going to be trying to establish some further progress on trade with China, which has been pretty much a mess for a long time, as far as we're concerned, that is. I think secondarily, he's going to try to move the Chinese, as he said very clearly to the South Korean parliament yesterday and to the world. You got to get on board here in terminating, I think, not simply trying to ameliorate the behavior, but terminating this North Korean puppet regime that you have been propping up all these years. I hope he'll be able to say that convincingly. I think the most important point of his speech, in some ways, was his discussion of the three carrier battle groups and the nuclear submarines that are on station to deal with the North Koreans, if need be, God forbid. But I'm hoping that he will have an ability to impress upon the Chinese that it would be a terrible mistake to take us as paper tigers, which the Chinese have done in the past and may be doing at the moment.
Yeah, and that's what it sounded like with Xi's epic 3-hour Lord of the Rings-esque speech that he gave. So, for Frank, last question for you. And again, Frank Gaffney, our guest at this time every week. Go to securefreedom.org and counterjihad.com to figure out what Frank's up to. We're celebrating today, 1-year anniversary of No Hillary, Yes Trump, the moment where the anti-establishment crowd stood up to the global elite, voted in Donald Trump for president. Your thoughts on the first year dealing with terrorism and national security?
Candidly, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think that there have been some very important steps taken, but it's been substantially offset, I'm sorry to say, by the appointment of people like H.R. McMaster as the National Security Advisor. I think he has been pretty much an unmitigated disaster, and much of what has yet to be fulfilled in terms of that agenda. I mentioned, draining the swamp. I mentioned, dealing with the immigration crisis by, among other things, building physically a barrier. And especially, Alex, on the question of understanding Sharia supremacism as the ideological threat we're facing domestically as well as internationally. McMaster has been on the wrong side, and I think unless and until he's gone, much of the promise of this presidency and the hopes that we all have for it in the years going forward will go unfulfilled as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, I happen to agree with you. Frank Gaffney, thank you, sir. We'll talk to you next week.